Hey, what's good? It's your boy MC. Welcome to another episode of the Vocal Minority Report. As always, you could have downloaded any podcast in the world, but you're here with me. I appreciate that. So, got I used to say great show, but getting on here and talking about the untimely and unfortunate deaths of young black people is getting a little old, frankly. But it's what we do, right? So we have to talk about what's happening out here in the world, so people know, so they can hopefully contribute to making a change. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm sure everyone watching knows the unfortunate story, the tragedy that exists and happened with 28-year-old Atatiana Tay Jefferson. Tay was her nickname that she went by, that her family has come to let us know. She was shot and killed by former Fort Worth police officer Aaron Dean. He's 34 years old, had been a police officer since April 2018, which obviously simple math shows you that's only about 18 months, so an extremely short amount of time. And then I don't know if that April 2018 is when he actually finished the academy or whatever training they go through after being hired, and and what his probationary period was. I'm not super familiar with that in the city of Fort Worth as of yet. So obviously, her death is a major, major tragedy. You can see the video playing behind me. That is from protest this weekend, a candlelight vigil, that turned into an actual protest over the lack of arrest for, at the time, Officer Aaron Dean, who has since resigned from the Fort Worth Police Department and has been arrested and charged with murder. He was arrested last evening, let's say around 6:15, booked with murder, and was eventually given a $200,000 bond that was paid, and he left jail about 9:30 last night. So, where do we go from here? As a matter of fact, where are we right now? So you can see Aaron Dean's picture here. This is the man. This is the alleged murderer of Atatiana Jefferson. You know, there's a lot to say in this case. There's a lot of video that I've posted. You have the body cam footage, which I'm not going to play. If you want to see that, it's on the YouTube page, the Vocal Minority Report, or you can go to Facebook slash Vocal Minority Report. Check out the body cam footage if you'd like. The most important thing about that night, and what the footage will confirm, is that the officers were there on a welfare check. They were going around the perimeter of Tatiana's home, her mother's home, actually, in Fort Worth, and went around to the back. And when Officer Dean approaches a window with his flashlight out, gun in one hand, he apparently sees something or someone through the window, gives relatively brief commands after never identifying himself as police, and then shoots one shot and kills Tatiana Jefferson. Miss Jefferson was home with her nephew at the time. He's 8 years old, and apparently they were playing video games either in that moment or somewhere around that time frame. They were playing some video games, and apparently that's how her night was going. And from all accounts, she, like Botham John and like so many other people struck down by uniformed officers who are unarmed and just in their own home, she had a lot going for her. You know, any life is precious, especially a black life, and especially considering the disproportionate nature of killing of black people in this country. But when you take out our best and our brightest, and that hour is collective, that is a black American, but that's an American. That is a contributor to society in this world. She was a pre-med graduate of Xavier University in Louisiana. There's video that we posted, and you can find it online, of her going through something way more complicated than I can understand, because she was a pre-med graduate. And basically, she was this sharp young lady who was at home entertaining, taking care of her nephew while her mother and sister were hospitalized and or recovering from some major events that they both had. You can see yesterday in the press conference that Tatiana's sister, and she mentioned it, she had some heart she had had some heart she had had some heart surgery. Sorry about that. And so it's just tragic all the way around. So Officer Dean has been arrested, and now we are to the point. I'm sorry, he's been arrested and he's bonded out. So who knows what he's doing this morning? I'm sure meeting with attorneys, union representatives, getting his story straight. There's a combined Texas union, police officers union, that will actually be paying his legal expenses. So that's one thing too. You have to remember in these cases, it's not just the tragedy of the loss of life without any real accountability after the fact initially. It's also the slap in the face that the unions will be paying for actually they'll be paying his bond amount, 200,000. So around 20,000 is what got him out. They paid that, and they said they'll be paying his legal fees too. So my point is one that the conversation that I have and that I like to say is the cash bail system in our country is a huge problem. It's a huge problem mostly because, it causes poor people and those slightly over poor and even, some of those in the middle class who I think they're not poor. It really shows the level of disparity when it comes to income and ability to bond yourself out of jail. I think the perfect example of this is Sandra Bland. Now, Sandra Bland is often included in dying at the hands of police, although we don't know the exact circumstances of her death. That's funny. It's not funny. It's sad funny that it's been so long. I started this show back in 2015, and remember, in the first episode I released was about Sandra Bland, and so we are now 4 years later, and I'm talking about another black woman, and I know she's not the only one. I realize that Atatiana Jefferson is not the only black woman who has been killed at the hands of police, at the hands of gunfire. However, she is the most recent, and she's the one that resonates with me the most. She's the most recent, and she's in my backyard. Fort Worth, Texas, Funky Town, as it's affectionately known here, is 30 miles away from where I sit right now. So, in essence, she is my neighbor. Botham Jean was 4 to 6 miles away from me. Tatiana, 30 miles away. But you look at her skin tone, you look at her face, that's my sister. And she was snuffed out in the prime of her life. Like, I'm 37, So, these people can't even make it till 30. Can't even make it till 30 years old because another person, a law enforcement officer, someone who should be trained, someone who, in this case, just had de-escalation training and was brand new. So you would think that his training is more in tune. Perhaps not. I don't really know. But all I know is that he got to the window, and before he's finishing saying his last statement, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I'm not showing the video, but show me your hands, let's say, is the last thing he says. My ears hear the bullet leaving his gun. He is shooting that gun before he finishes the last syllable. That's what I hear and see, and I'll let you guys, you can see and hear for yourselves what you think. So, what now, right? We have a long time to wait until he is brought to justice, and by brought to justice, I mean tried in front of a jury of his peers. Now, I'll caution you that Fort Worth, Texas, it's only 30 miles away, but it's a cow town. Even still, that's its reputation. If you watch when you watch football games, and you watch things in DFW, and you see the stockyards, and they'll show the cows and horses and all that country stuff. That's more on the west side of the Metroplex. That's out west in Fort Worth. And even though they have I won't say overwhelmingly high number of black people and people of color, because there's obviously a lot of Mexicans, and I'll say Mexicans specifically because we're in Texas, but there's the it's still a very Republican dominated city and area and county, and because of that, a lot of times the decisions that are made don't mirror those of its more liberal neighbor, sister, big brother, Dallas. So I hope all that makes sense there. They're much more conservative, and I'd be wary of the jury in this case. I said it last episode, I'll keep saying it. You know, the jury is what we need to worry about now. The murder charge is great, but in the case of Anthony Hill, who was shot by Officer Robert Olson, Anthony Hill, 25-year-old Air Force veteran, Bronze Leaf recipient, highly decorated, but he was tragically flawed. One, he's black. Two, he was over in the desert fighting this endless war and suffered some effects from that, and certainly had the effects of PTSD on him, and they show. And the reason why that's important is because Officer Robert Olson was acquitted of murder yesterday. So on Monday, Officer Robert Olson, who shot Anthony Hill as he was naked and running toward him, after witnesses clearly overheard him saying, "They're here to help me," and he was blown away by this officer. And a jury of his peers in Georgia did not convict him of murder. Now, they did convict him of lesser charges, and those lesser charges included aggravated assault, lying under oath, and things that have to do with his capacity as a law enforcement officer. Now, he may he could still face up to 35 years in prison, and Georgia, unlike Texas, will have the judge, who's a black woman, for what it's worth, apply that sentence. Until then, he is out, and he is not in custody, excuse me. He is under supervision with the ankle monitor, and may or may not have a curfew. So I say that to say, unfortunately, we have to temper our expectations. We already see what has happened here with Aaron Dean. Fort Worth Police Chief Ed Kraus said that he has been uncooperative. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. That could mean something as simply as he's not going for sitting down and talking with police without an attorney, which, playing literally devil's advocate, is completely okay in his right, because we all know, or you should know, that you have every right not to speak to the police without an attorney present. What you say will be used against you, and their whole objective is to lock you into a story. So, that's just a reminder for everybody watching of what their job is. So again, we're put in the position as citizens that we must give a lot of leeway to the prosecutors and police in this instance. Now, I'm very leery of doing that. I think it's appropriate to charge him with murder, and I think it's appropriate to charge him swiftly. But as is the case, and it's so weird, I've heard people comparing this to Amber Geiger, killing of Botham Jean, and it took 3 days to arrest her, and the upgrade in the charges from manslaughter versus murder, and a decent amount of credit has been given to Fort Worth PD. And I want everybody to hold their horses, okay? So it took 3 days to arrest Amber Geiger. Well, the murder of Atatiana Jefferson happened about 2:25 in the morning, Saturday morning. Officer Dean, or former Officer Dean, Aaron Dean, was not arrested until Monday night around 6:15. So, simple math. Saturday to Sunday, 2 in the morning is 1 day. Sunday to Monday, 2 in the morning is 2 days. 2 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon is 12 hours. Add another 4. So it took almost 3 days for him to be arrested. So I just want folks to realize, and I think they do, that we basically have more of the same happening. So much so that, I truly believe that in this time when Officer Dean did not turn himself in, when he was not arrested, when he was not charged with murder, I say, well, what was he doing online? Isn't that the ample time for him to be scrubbing his online social media presence? Isn't that the ample amount of time for him to be scrubbing his family's online media presence? Whatever the case is, he's got a head start on the police, a police force who have already gone out of their way to make his case for him. The initial press statement from Fort Worth Police in their veil of transparency says that the white officer saw what he perceived as a threat, or he saw a perceived threat through the window prior to shooting. A perceived threat? My woman is at home in her house. I wouldn't care if she was holding an AR-15. That's not a threat. You came to check me out. How do you know I didn't just walk through the door and I'm sweeping it to make sure my house is not safe? Why don't these officers, why are they unable and unequipped to make rational, in the moment decisions? If they can't do that, they shouldn't carry guns. And I don't want to hear this about how many cops are killed and Blue Lives Matter and all that. Miss me with that. Hell, if I had a gun, I'd shoot out your blue light in front of your house. I can't stand that. All lives matter. We know that. Anyway, let me not go on that tangent. Let me stick to what I'm talking about here, okay? So, the sheer numbers show that 709 people have been shot and killed by the police in 2019. 709 people. There's only 365 days in a year, and we're only in October. We have like 3 full months to go, or 2.5 full months to go. I'll tell you something even crazier. The number was 689 just 6 days ago. So in 6 days, the police have shot and killed 20 more people, including Atatiana Jefferson, who, like a decent percentage of these people, was unarmed. And I can tell you that that number is higher for whites. The number of white people shot, according to the Washington Post, is in the 200s. The number of black people shot is in the 120s. And then there's 200 who are unknown. So I don't even know how you quantify and include that extra 200. But let's just look at it in total, because I have a lot of people, or a few people come to me, especially white people, come to me and tell me that I am speaking the same rhetoric as those in the White House and that I'm perpetuating black versus white. I'm just telling you the truth. The overwhelming majority of police forces in this country, and there's so many police forces, I think there's like 3,000 of them, something ridiculous, are white. In urban areas, the overwhelming majority of the citizens that they encounter are black or Hispanic or some other ethnic minority or ethnic group, whatever term you want to use, right? So if that's the case, then we know that the cops shoot and kill too many people. And conversely, less than 40 police officers have been killed by gunfire in 2019. Less than 40. So 700 versus 40. Okay? All of these are citizens. All of their lives should be valuable. And it really shouldn't matter who's pulling the trigger, right? So Blue Lives Matter, are we sure? I mean, because they're dying at a way smaller clip. I mean, a much smaller clip. And I just want that to be known and reiterated, that Atatiana Jefferson is included in that terrible, terrible club. 709 people shot and killed by police. Now, some of those probably deserved it. Some of them could have been wielding guns, maybe shot at the police first, whatever. But we're not talking about those people. We're not talking about Joshua Brown. We're not talking about a witness with a controversial past. We're talking about a civilian, a square, an L7, a woman, as far as I know, and I don't mean that in a negative fashion. I'm just saying this is a woman above reproach as far as I know. Okay? Tatiana taking care of her nephew, sitting at her house. Let's presuppose, or let's assume what happened that night. I don't know why she would have left the door open, okay? It doesn't matter to me. If she did leave the door open, but that's what the neighbor said, so we'll go with that. Door open, lights on. You can kind of see it a little bit when the police get there, but again, they never announce themselves. They never do anything to let the occupants of the house know that they're there. The neighbor called on a non emergency line. A tactical team was sent out to do a welfare check. SRT, Special Response Team. That's who was sent out to do a welfare check for this young lady, and that ultimately may be why she lost her life. I know Lee Merritt and others, members of the Texas legislature, the Black Caucus, they asked that question, why was that team sent out? And it's something that has to be asked because if you can't handle your job, or if you can't make assessments in real time, or if the dispatcher can't send the right team, or if you're short staffed, or whatever it is, we need to know that. But I think one thing that needs to be said too, because I'm hearing a lot of stuff in these press conferences, I'm seeing a lot of apathy from black people, white people, observers of what's happening. And I'm finding that a lot of people are getting frustrated with what's happening. They're tired of seeing Lee Merritt's face on camera, and this is not no disrespect to Lee. I talked to him yesterday. I actually hope to have him on the show here today or tomorrow, sometime soon. But folks are tired of these press conferences, and they're tired of words without action. Because ultimately, the change starts with us, but unless we are doing everything we can to make sure that change is executed, then what are we doing? I mean, I tell you, Dallas is full of black people in leadership, and their cops still shoot black people all the time, and unarmed citizens all the time. Fort Worth shoots less people. I see Dallas had 109 gun violence deaths. Some of those are cop related, obviously, in the last year. Fort Worth had 40. Now, according to an NPR report I heard yesterday, they've had 6 or 7 officer-involved shootings since June, and 6 of those were fatal. Now, I haven't been able to confirm that, but just think about that. 6 officer-involved shootings since June. So in 4 months, 7 shootings, and 6 of those fatal, including Atatiana Jefferson. So the idea that calling the police out for help and who you're gonna call, and it doesn't matter. If you interact with the police, especially as a black person, your percentage to not make it out of that situation is higher than our white counterparts. No doubt about it. With all due respect to the young lady in Minneapolis who was killed by black officer Muhammad Noor, she called the police, asked for help. She was barefoot and walked up to the police car, and he shot her as soon as she got to the car, and he got 12 years. So all the press conferences in the world, all the murder charges, convictions, none of that matters unless the people who are making the decisions, the hiring decisions, and ultimately standing out there in these communities, unless they change. But I mean, all of this is systemic, right? I mean, all of this goes back a long, long time. All of this happens to do with the power imbalance, with the militarization of police in the United States. I've been talking about this stuff for years, literally. Like, I don't really like talking about dead black people in the prime of their lives. Okay? I'd really like to talk about how special and wonderful we are as a people. I'd like to talk about the ones of us who are locked up for too long for things that we don't need to be in there for. I'd like to talk about the ones of us that can't afford bail. I mentioned Sandra Bland earlier. I got sidetracked, but my point about Sandra Bland was I believe her bail or bond was $500. And if you watch the documentaries regarding her, you will see and hear her family say that they were trying to get the money. Okay? So when you have a small bond like that, it's usually not 10% of that. You have to pay a higher percentage, or maybe the 500 was the percentage of a $5,000 bond. I don't remember what the exact amount was, but I know that it was a few $100s that it could have gotten Sandra Bland out of jail. And she ultimately died after being arrested. So my point is the system is extremely flawed. And it's almost like if you commit a crime and you're white and you're covered by a union, which I love unions. My grandfather was a labor leader, a great labor leader in Dallas, well respected, and in Texas. And but the police union, as we know, um, has his back, and it's not fair to what other citizens go through. So my proposal when it comes to bail and bond reform is if you have somebody caught on camera, I mean, everybody's innocent until proven guilty, but there's got to be layers, right? If I have you on camera with irrefutable evidence, there's got to be an additional layer that either raises your bond to a certain amount or we have to put in something else in place. I need to flush this out a little bit more, but this can't continue to happen because all it does is add more pages in the playbook of white supremacy. The dominant society, and that's what you call white people who think it's okay to knock us off, who think it's okay to tell me and others that race doesn't matter, stop bringing it up. We have to change this narrative for us. And it's going to take more than press conferences. And I think it's going to take more than, these protests are really going to have to increase and keep going. We're going to have to change our playbook until they change their playbook. Now, today, if you watch the press conference from the state legislature and Lee Merritt, let's talk about voting and what we can do and accountability, and all that's true. You need to get out and vote. You need to know who the district attorney is. You need to know who the mayor is. You need to know who your city council representatives are. Local elections matter. They matter way more than the national elections, but whatever. All of that is true. But how do we as citizens today, as black people, as white people who support us, as everyone who is against the tyranny of the state, against state-sanctioned killings, how do we all come together and collectively define what justice looks like and get on one accord? That's the question I have for you. That's what I want to continue to work on because I am tired of this. I'm so tired of this. I literally want to talk about so many other things affecting people who look like me. Rodney Reed is an innocent man in prison set to be executed in 35 days in Texas. I think there's 3 men who've been exonerated and got out of prison this month. I mean, that's the stuff that I said we want to be talking about, getting people out, but instead I have to talk about a woman dying. So I'd love to know you guys' thoughts. You can email me, vocalreport@gmail.com. Leave a comment. I'll be going live more often, as I keep saying. And I'm just trying to get some clarity for the people. Aaron Dean is just the most recent one, but he is not the exception. He's also not the rule. I'm sure there's a lot of nice cops out there. Shout out to my man, Officer Michael Lee in Dallas. That's my guy. And there's several out there. But the shoot first mentality of police across this country, the over-policing, the over-militarization of our police has got to stop. Black people cannot afford to be apathetic right now and say this is the same old, or what are we going to do now? You can't do that. You can't watch your football games and your college football and your UFC and keep making the same 30, 40 families richer in the United States, keep being passive when it comes to voting and electing people who will represent you in a positive manner. You can't do that anymore. We have to stand up. We need justice for Atatiana. We need justice for Botham Jean. We need fair sentencing. We need sentencing guidelines that dictate that if this happens and And officer, if these elements are proven, you must convict. Uh, and we need to hold the juries accountable. I hope somebody in the jury pool is watching this video. I hope that they will understand their level of trust that we have in them, that we need them to come through for us. We already know that Fort Worth PD and the Tarrant County District Attorney are going to be wishy-washy. We already know that the Dallas Morning News and other media outlets are going to say they're covering both sides, and we're going to tell you that Tatiana was holding the gun and pointing the gun at Officer Dean when he looked through the window. How would anybody know that? How would anybody know that? See, I think the beauty of having the body cam footage in this case is, I think it lends a lot of credence, unfortunately, to what Amber Geiger may have said in her encounter with Botham Jean. Not excusing it, but I'm telling you that I think if we gave her all the benefit of the doubt and we looked at the footage of the Dean body cam footage, he shoots, again, like I said, before he even finishes saying, "Show me your hands." Doesn't identify himself as police, and gives the victim no time to react. So to me, I can see how it happened now with Botham Jean. The door's ajar, or whatever. I mean, she puts the door in, she's on a red mat. I can't even give her the benefit of the doubt, but whatever, let's just say. So she's standing on the red mat, puts the key in, pushes it open, hand on hip. I already heard something. She's ready to go. As soon as she sees Botham Jean, no matter where he was in the apartment, she started shouting commands. And while she was still talking, pop, pop, double tap, center mass. I think we now have seen it in the Dean body cam footage. It's murder. You go to someone's house, you shoot them without any actual threat, perceived or otherwise, or actual. That's murder. So now, in the time between when the trial will take place, what do we have to do? Well, what we have to do is we have to come together and support one another, and not be apathetic, not be over it, not come for one another. Don't worry about the people who are telling you not to worry about race, because the smart people understand that she's a human and she just happens to be black. Okay? Smart people that we want to interact with and deal with and support the cause, will get that we are all the same. If Aaron Dean would have died on Saturday night instead of him killing Atatiana Jefferson, and let's say they both died that night, or hell, I died that night, whatever. My point is, I'm an organ donor, right? They would take my organs and put them in that man's body. He could be the most racist, evil cop person in the world, and they would give my organs to him to save his life. And he more than likely would have a thriving remainder of his life with my organs. My point is, we are all the same. We are all the same. And why I can understand that and believe that and know that, but I won't say the average cop or the average white cop doesn't know and believe that, is beyond me. So, in closing, I'm completely mystified and upset about yet another killing of an unarmed black person in their home. Her neighbor was called the police for help, non-emergency line, welfare check, and this is what we end up with. A 34-year-old officer out on bond, a Atatiana Jefferson body is wherever they put your body when you die. I imagine it's at a funeral home right now. And I just want everybody just to, I don't even know, just stay positive and follow the show, The Vocal Minority Report. I'll be talking to Lee Merritt here soon, and I'll be keeping you updated on this case as it progresses, trying to preserve her memory and her legacy, and making sure that, you know, making sure that this doesn't keep happening. We've got to change policing. You know, one thing about policing that I think is interesting that I don't know that a lot of folks realize or think about is, you know, the police, we have too many. I hate this idea that crime is high, we need more cops. All across the country, the crime rate is going down over the last 30 years. Now, some of that may be new reporting. A lot of that is drugs have changed, the war on drugs have changed, and lifestyle has changed. And there are so many more police. But I don't believe that more police is the answer. I think fewer police and fewer guns on the street is the answer. I think more teams, more critical and tactical assessment is what's needed. I think true community policing, I think you shouldn't even be allowed to patrol an area or go on a call unless you live in that area. How can you live in Little Elm or Frisco and drive into Dallas, into Pleasant Grove or Oak Cliff or South Dallas, Dixon Circle, wherever, and deal with those people? How can you? Hell, I might get nervous driving from North Dallas down there. You feel me? So how can you do that? Now, I don't know where Officer Dean lived in Fort Worth, but Fort Worth has similar dynamics as far as where people live. She looks like she lived, Miss Jefferson lived in a nice area. But you get what I'm saying? You need people, and they don't necessarily have to look like you, but they've got to know you. They've got to respect you. That's the problem with the term African American in this country. We're already subjugated from the top. We can't even just be black. We can't even just be American. And I know that Jesse Jackson and others, you know, back in the 80s, they are partly responsible for that. And I want to hold them to task for that, okay? We are black. But more importantly, we are American. Our lives are just as valuable as anyone else's. The preservation of life that the Fort Worth police and Dallas police like to talk about includes everyone. So we have to make sure that we remind people, the dominant society, and everyone, even amongst ourselves, because again, I'm hearing all this negative talk, that we do matter and we are valuable. So if it takes a Atatiana Jefferson to be the most recent flag bearer of that, then that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to say her name. We're going to have to support her legacy and make sure that this does not keep happening. So in the meantime, what can you do? You can pray and ask that Rodney Reed is released from prison for a crime he didn't commit, so he's not executed next month. You can pray, you can hope, you can support that Officer Robert Olson in Georgia is sentenced to the max 35 years for shooting unarmed, naked Anthony Hill. You can push and share all the information you have on this case so that everyone knows the depth of the mistake that Aaron Dean made and that he should be convicted as a murderer in the state of Texas and do more than 10 years or 12 years. So that's what you can do. If you have any other things, suggestions, definitely let me know. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe, hit notifications if you're listening to the podcast, leave a rating and review. Send me an email, vocalreport@gmail.com. All power to the people. Peace.